Hey everybody, it's your girl Tawana B with Not Your Normal Conversation. I hope all is well. I hope you had a blessed day. And as you already know, I am joined by Nicole Bell from Lyft. I have been anticipating this interview for since I started my podcast, and it's almost been a year ago. So she was hard to track down, but nonetheless, she's here today. And Nikki, I just want to say thank you for joining me. I'm grateful to have you here. I feel like not just your organization, but your story is going to help someone today. If they haven't started the healing process, they can start today, or at least they'll know how to reach out to you and find your organization and maybe take it from there. So, first, I'd like to say hello. Thank you for joining me. I really appreciate you being here. And as I told you before we went on live, that if I become emotional, please excuse me and know that it's not really about me, but I want your story to get out there. And people who don't know that you have an organization that helps people who have been sex trafficked, I think this is an important conversation to have. And so today, I just want you to feel free to say whatever it is that you feel can help many women and even some men. I think sometimes people forget that men can be harmed in this way as well. So I would like for you to introduce yourself to people that know you and don't know you, and we'll take it from there.
Sure. I also want to thank you for having me here. You and I crossed paths many years ago, and actually, one of the survivors that actually now works with us. We were talking about you this afternoon, and just how grateful we are, and how uh, you know we intersect with each other at different places in our lives. Anyhow, my name is Nicole Bell, and I am the founder and chief executive officer of an organization in Worcester called Living in Freedom Together. We call it Lyft. I am also, I think more importantly, a survivor of prostitution and trafficking, and a person in long-term recovery, which for me means I haven't used drugs and alcohol in over 7 years. It's also a previously incarcerated woman, and experience, every form of gender-based violence under the sun, unfortunately.
Right. And so today I brought you here because I realized that my platform is based on either trying to change laws or trying to help
Mhm.
people to get to a place where they can understand that this is a problem in the community and how we can help. And
Mhm.
so I'm going to ask you to kind of, and I hope that this doesn't bother you. I'm sure you get it a lot. You speak a lot of places. I've seen you all over the place. And just to let you know that I'm grateful for you, and I'm sure many other women have said the same. You're in the courtroom, you are everywhere. And I think that that's something that a lot of people need to know, that even though you may have gone through something, you can help other people heal at the same time. So I'm just going to ask you how you got to not just start this nonprofit organization, but what happened to you in your life that you felt like
Mhm.
you needed to start to help other people heal as you were healing?
Sure. So I think I appreciate you framing it as what happened to you, because for so many years it was always like, what's wrong with you, what's wrong with you, what's wrong with you, and that kept me really stuck in this place of like self-blame and not being able to kind of shift and have any forward movement. So in order to talk about how I got to the place where I am today, supporting other survivors, I think it's important to talk about how I got there, because I think that's often the conversation that's really missed. We look at people in prostitution, and oftentimes make this assumption of choice, and that this is what they want to be doing. And for many, and I'm going to go as far as to say most, they're there not because of choice, but because of lack of choice, and lack of other options, particularly black and brown women, as in particularly black and brown trans women. Um, and so I myself, had a difficult childhood. My mom was sick, and my parents split up, and we had just a lot of kind of like chaos at home. And as a teenage girl, I you know I I had my first psych hospitalization at 14. Started marijuana, alcohol, the kind of typical stuff that most kids start experimenting with at 13, 14, except for me right away. It was more escaping than it was experimenting. And so
Right.
like I helped me get away from all the stuff that was happening. And so I ended up working at a local restaurant in my town, and one of the women that works there, her son started coming in and paying attention to me. And as a teenage girl with low self-esteem, it felt good, right? And started buying me things, and I often, previously I used to refer to it as my first like relationship, but the reality was it wasn't a relationship. You know, he was preying on me. He was like 34 years old and I was 16, 17. And so, you know, he started telling me all the stories about how I could get out, escape all the craziness at home. We could get away from there if we just, had the money to do it, and started sending me in first to like dance at bachelorette parties and things like that for his friends in the North End. And what he was doing was really like kind of grooming me and pushing me towards prostitution.
Right.
And me at 16, not able to see the long game that he was playing, right? And then from there, he started sending me into hotels to have sex with adult men. You know, I I didn't really have very many healthy relationships in my life to model after like what that looked like. I knew that my friends' boyfriends that they had in high school weren't sending them to have sex with other men.
Right.
But it was also this feeling of like shame and like, who do you talk to about that? And at the time, I will also say, it dates me a little bit. I'm going to be 41 years old, but you
Right.
know, there wasn't this conversation about prostitution and exploitation and trafficking. It wasn't a conversation that was being had. And so, I ended up pregnant very young, and going out to California to give my daughter up for adoption. And it was after giving birth to her that my addiction really, really took off. I was prescribed opiates from the doctor after I delivered. I asked for more. Hopping buses all over Orange County to doctor shop, and just ended up coming back to Massachusetts with a hole in my heart, right? I think, oftentimes we don't talk about adoption either, and like the loss that that brings for women, and serious opiate addiction. I was able to come off the meds with the help of a doctor, the opiates, but I didn't really learn anything about recovery. It was really just I detoxed. And so very shortly thereafter, my mother passed away, and I took off with other drugs, alcohol, cocaine, anything I could kind of get my hands on. And I had a really rough period from the time I was 19 till 25, where I was just in and out of psychiatric institutions, until finally I decided to go to treatment. I came to Worcester for treatment. I was not from the city. I was not from this area. And, very quickly thereafter, I met somebody that introduced me to crack cocaine and street prostitution. And that is where I spent the next 10 years of my life. Lost another child, was arrested over 20, just got my record vacated over 29 times,
Right.
experienced horrific violence at the hands of sometimes intimate partners, but more often than not at the hands of sex buyers, and just didn't know how to get out. I didn't know how to stop. I didn't know even where to turn. And 7.5 years ago now, I was arrested again, and this time I just when I was released to the shelter again, but I I knew that I couldn't continue in prostitution. I was either going to kill myself or kill somebody, and I that's when Lyft started essentially. And for me, social justice work was my pathway to exiting the life.
When I got introduced to Just Your Name alone, there were so many people that were attached to Just Your Name in such a positive way. In the Rhodes House, there were a lot of women who either knew you or knew of you. And I knew that although I wasn't a drug addict, that I kept going in and out of prison. And for me, I needed to know how to stop. So when the person that we have in common came in and we were having a meeting, and she's telling us about you and how you had invited her to this function, was the first time that I looked at this person that I broke bread with for weeks, and we talked about a lot of things, our kids and our past, and was the first time I saw that she had some hope in what could become of her life. And although in the process of knowing you, she's had some stumbling blocks, I see that you are still active in her life. And so I just have to say thank you for so many women who haven't, and they may have shown you with their actions how much your organization and you and your story mean to them. But I'm wondering, as I'm talking to you, and of course you can tell that I'm just trying not to cry. I will not lie. It is almost impossible to listen to something like this and then, have some experience, maybe not the same type of experience, but not feel some type of emotion behind it. Um, I've watched you, and every time I get a chance to know more about your organization, I research it.
Mhm.
And, I see today that it's really real in the communities, that more people are being sex trafficked, more people are out prostituting, more people are harming themselves because of things that have happened to them in their past. And I haven't met many people who have an organization like yours. And more importantly, you're not just an organization, you're in the courts. So the place that you were ordered to go to and then sent to prison or to county jail is the same place you fight for other women, to allow the system to understand that without maybe prostitution and without drugs and without sex trafficking, you may not see this man or this woman standing before you, Your Honor. So what do we do now?
Mhm.
And I think the reason why this issue is such a hot topic is because there's not enough organizations like yours that go into the courts with people and speak on their behalf. Because I think sometimes the system is so bogged down with so many issues that they see us as just another number, and they say,
Yeah.
well, we'll send you to MCI Framingham, or we'll send you to South Bay, or we'll send you to any jail, just because we don't know exactly what to do with you. And this is where you come in. And I just honestly need to know, because I've seen so many times someone go and speak on another person's behalf and nothing happens. The judge resists the person that's trying to help and says their record looks like they don't really care about what they're doing. And they're sent to prison to be more damaged than they could have ever been had they allowed you to help, or you or some other organization to help them and to step in. So I have to ask you, because you have a nonprofit, have you tried to change any laws? Because I see you everywhere, and I heard that you were at the State House. I've heard you have been everywhere sharing your story. And so I would like to stand with you in this. I feel like there's power in numbers. If people can stand together for something, this is a big deal. There's little girls getting lured off of the internet and off of dating websites by older men, and their parents never see them again. And they end up in this vicious cycle because either it's happened to them in their home, so they're used to it and they think this is the way it's supposed to be, or they don't know any better and they're looking for love and attention. Can I ask you a question? If we want to talk numbers, how many
Mhm.
people do you think that you've helped or that have come to your organization completely broken, and you've gone to court with them and you've done all these things and it's been successful as far as you can see?
So, it's, I was actually having this conversation with somebody earlier. It's like when we're looking, grantors and funders, they want these like measurements of success, right? And success looks different depending upon who you are and what your goals are in life, right?
Right.
Um, I can tell you that, um, the majority of our staff were participants that are now working alongside me. I can tell you that the people that we engage with, whether they get out now or, um, are not out and are still involved in prostitution, are remaining connected to us and continue to come back for services, which I think is really significant. Because oftentimes we go places for help and we're treated like such a bother, like just like, you know, you were talking about the court system, even like in like the nonprofit and like social service agencies, oftentimes you'll go places for help and they treat you like you're a bother, and like you know, even though that's what they're actually paid to do, right?
Right.
You're coming through their doors and they're like, oh, her again, you know, like and so for us, I think you know, success is it's dependent upon the individual and what they want. But when I see that survivors are continuing to come back to us for support, that to me is success. When I see that if somebody is arrested, they have our outreach team's contact information and can reach out to us, I look at that as success. You know, we've just celebrated 4 years of running our program in Western Mass Women's Correctional Facility.
I'm
And
aware.
I can't,
They're
yeah,
great over there. They're great.
yeah. And I will tell you, they, you know, doing that for 4 years, that started out just me going in there and volunteering because we were seeing this incredible number of survivors and sisters that you know, I was out there with, going into jail and coming out and dying, right? And so we were like, we've got to do something. I was like, well, gotta do something, right? And so we started this group, which was, you know, like literally the very like inception of Lyft. So, you know, I can tell you, we at Lyft alone have worked with, you know, over 400 individuals at this point.
Wow.
Which, when you think about it, we are pretty Worcester centric. I mean, we will take referrals from anywhere, and we've gone and met people at court in Boston and brought them out to our program. But when you think about just that alone in itself, and those are people that are like coming to us for services, or we've gone to court and so the court has called us or the jail's called, you know, whatever. But you think about how many more people are out there that don't even know we exist and don't even and so when you think about, you know, that volume of people being exploited and prostituted just within Worcester is incredible.
Absolutely. I see it a lot out there because I was in Millbury, but
Yep.
you know, more importantly, I see it everywhere. And it's
Mhm.
definitely disheartening when you see somebody that you've been incarcerated with and you've had a conversation with them about what life looks like for them on the outside, and then you see them right back out there either on Blue Hill Ave or Mass
Yeah.
Ave or wherever they're at, and you wonder what you could say or do that's going to change their circumstances. So I suppose that because you've been through this before, and the way that you would react to people coming to you to try to tell you that you needed to make a change, you probably see that in a lot of people that come to you and ask for services. Sometimes you look at a person and you can say, this is, they're going to do it this time, and then for whatever reason it doesn't happen. I was just saying to someone the other night that we have the best intentions coming out of prison, especially, and even in programs, we have the best intentions to do the right thing. You don't want to be back out there. I don't know what it's like to be on the streets. I don't know what it's like to use drugs, but my mother has been in recovery for almost 27 years. So I know what it looks like on somebody else. And I also know the challenges that most people face if you come out to homelessness and if you come out to going to a program where they've seen you before and they're like, oh, her again. You do have those staff that do that, just like in
Yeah.
prison. They're like, oh, she's back. You know,
Mm-hmm.
and it's a cycle that can't break unless somebody like you comes in and says, hey, I was just like you and there's hope.
Mm-hmm.
Um, if you've done any statistics on women that you've had in your program and then either they walk away or they end up somewhere,
Mm-hmm.
could you say that you've gone to a lot of funerals in your time of doing this
Yeah.
type of work?
Mm-hmm. Yes. You know, we actually had to like put policies into place of like when we want to be notified of one of our participants' deaths, because it's like, you know, we've lost over 10% of the women that we've worked with. You know, that's over 40 women that we were working with and are now gone. And so death is, you know, when you're looking at prostitution and opiates and, you know, is a very real risk for many of the women that we support.
Right.
And I think that's what is like so challenging is that, you know, even like the program that we were talking about before, it's like most of the women in that program have had to exchange sex for drugs, money, a place to stay, whatever that may be, but none of the caseworkers talk about it, right? None, like nobody talks about the trauma that actually gets us there,
Yeah.
right? And so when you don't, uh, treat both things like, simultaneously,
Mhm.
substance use and trauma, because they're inextricably linked and one accelerates the other, right? So
Right.
it's like, if you stop using and then now you don't have any coping skills and your trauma is sitting here, right? Like, how do you navigate that if you don't have somebody to process it with, if you don't learn any grounding skills or get any actual like trauma therapy? Your go-to solution is to pick up whatever substance, you know, is makes you less fearful, makes you not want to crawl out of your skin, makes you,
Right.
and then with the substances, it's like when you're using, you're often forced to do things that you wouldn't do, right? Where you're not using drugs, right? And it becomes this awful cycle of needing money for drugs, and so needing to get in that car, and then needing drugs to forget what just happened in that car, right? And so they both, like I said, accelerate the other, and like it's like we just don't talk about it in programs, which is why we actually opened Jana's Place. It was like, okay, enough is enough. Like we
Right.
need a space that is like focused on trauma, and people can begin to do the really difficult work and recognize that um oftentimes we view people in treatment programs as having this attitude or being angry, and it's a trauma response.
Right.
So let's ignore that, like, because that's what that is. That's a trauma response. And then circle back and say, hey, what happened? Right? Like, and how can we help you not do that next time when you're feeling whatever you're feeling, right? You know what I mean? um but we don't, I mean, we don't talk about it. We just pretend that prostitution doesn't exist. We also shame women that have been prostituted. It's like, even in the treatment programs, it's like, oh, that girl, like she, and it's like, yeah, that's all of us for
Right.
the most part, right?
Right.
Like,
Right. Right.
so you want to pretend like that wasn't you, but, exchanging sex with your dealer for a a bag of, a couple bags of heroin is the same thing as me doing that for money on the block, right? Like,
Right.
it's just, you're taking drugs and I'm taking money to buy drugs, right? So
Right.
it's like, but we do that to each other as women, instead of like looking for that like shared common experience. We tear each other apart, and our programs don't address it.
Absolutely. So I heard you say that your program is mostly in Worcester, right? And so I look around at some of the programs here in the Boston area, and I find that there are programs that are geared towards just people who are drug addicts or have done these things. But like you said, there's a bigger issue because I hate math, but when I was in Framingham, I went to BU and I took statistics. So I started to look around at my surroundings and I figured out that 82% of the women who were incarcerated have been molested or raped by somebody that they loved and cared about. And 60% of those women then in turn went out to use drugs and prostitute. So if you take the trauma, the drugs, and the prostitution off the table, you probably would have a lot of women who are no longer incarcerated.
Yeah.
And so I see a system that is designed in a lot of ways for us to fail.
Mhm.
Because if you're talking about getting help, um, a lot of women who are in prison should not be there.
Yeah.
They're stealing because they want to get high. They're doing something because of something else. It's never a direct result of just them just wanting to do these things.
Right.
And in saying that, how often have you met with judges and prosecutors and defense attorneys to kind of combat and say, hey, listen, there's mitigating circumstances, and unless you're looking for them, you won't find them. You'll only find a woman or a man who is doing something that led them to be before you. And then you get to determine how they heal.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's a lot of the work that we're doing is really trying to change systems and change the way survivors are treated by the criminal justice system. You know, it's like when you're talking about like most women in prison have a history of trauma, right? Uh, I actually probably think the number's higher than what you're
Probably
saying.
is. Yeah.
And then our solution to that is to further traumatize people. So let's arrest them, right? Let's handcuff them. Let's throw them in a dirty cell. Let's degrade them and call them names. And then let's let them out and then berate them when they come back, though they can no longer find work because of the criminal justice system. They can't find safe housing because of their interactions with the criminal justice system, right? And so we need to do better, right? I mean, for me, you talked about changing laws and shifting systems, and so myself and other survivors across our state actually like working on a bill to decriminalize for the prostituted person, so it would no longer be a criminal offense to sell sex. There would still be penalties for buyers and pimps, and I believe those need to stay intact, right? But it would first of all force law enforcement to spend their energy and resources targeting those who are driving this market, the buyers, right?
Right.
And would instead offer exit services and a way out of the life for those who want that, right? Like, because there is this conversation about people wanting to be in prostitution and it's their choice. So great if we are able to get this bill passed that decriminalizes for the exploited person. That's not gonna affect your ability to remain in prostitution should you want to be, right?
Right.
You can continue on in that fashion, but it will provide pathways out of the life and stop this vicious cycle of just like arresting and re-traumatizing people and sending them back into the same situation that they came out of, right? I'll say for me, I was able to have my record vacated under, a law that was passed for survivors of trafficking and prostitution. But, I was arrested, almost 30 times, and never once did anybody say, is anybody making you do this? Do you want to stop? Do you want some help? Let
Right.
me connect you to some resources. It was always put your hands behind your back, Bell. Like, and then back in front of the judge, setting a bail that I couldn't afford because I was, indigent and homeless, right? So
Right.
being held awaiting trial on a misdemeanor prostitution charge, right? And then being released with a gate fee, right? So they give me my money to get back on a bus to go back to Western. I have my money to start the cycle all over again.
Right.
It was like insanity. And so how do we shift away from this like criminal justice response and start looking at this as like a greater cultural issue, right? Agreed, this happens to men as well, and I'm not disputing that, and I believe everybody should have access to the supports that they need to exit. But when we look at this issue globally, it's women and girls that are in brothels all over the world. It's women and girls that are sexualized, from birth, right? It's women and girls that you know are are dealing with violence at the hands of men, right? And so, I think we need to start having this greater conversation around, the impacts of, violence at the hands of men. Because, we want to do a lot of talk about, gang violence and then terrorism and all of these other kinds of things, but it's like who is most deadly to women is American men,
Right. Right.
and oftentimes our intimate partners.
Absolutely. It's funny that you you touched upon the fact that when women are in custody, and when they're in different programs, I have seen a lot of women who know officers by their first and last name. And the only reason why they know that is because they tricked with them before.
Yeah.
So it's not uncommon for them to come into a situation with a person that they may have just been with for a fee about
Mhm.
a week or two ago. And now you have this officer who decides to call you a crackhead and a dope fiend and a prostitute. And you cannot respond to that because it means that you are being insolent towards an officer. When in fact, um, this officer is worse than you are
Mhm.
because they know the law, right?
Yeah.
So we have that type of thing. And then
Mhm.
we have the judges that sit on the bench that say, how many times am I going to see you and how many times are you going to do this? So instead of building more programs, we'll build more prisons to house you.
Mhm.
You can get more drugs in jail than you could ever get on the streets.
Mhm.
And
Yep.
sometimes you have to do things to get those drugs.
Yep.
So they're still right in the same predicament that they were in before they came into prison. But it's even worse because you're there to do a sentence, and more often than not, you are abused worse than you could ever be on the street.
Yep.
And I have been called all of those names, and I haven't done any of those things, right? Because they think that most of the women who are in custody, that that's how they got there.
Yeah.
So how do we stop this for the
You
women?
know, yeah. So I think first and foremost, it's like, again, like shifting and getting this legislation passed, so that, we're not incarcerating, those without a choice, right? Like we're arresting and criminalizing, and penalizing those that really are not choosing to be there. They're there because they can't get work, or they're discriminated against in the workplace, or they have a criminal history, or right, like all of those other, or they're like living in poverty, or right, all of these other like underlying things. And I think you brought up like a really great point of like, you know, people knowing these officers by their first and last name. I think we know, right, as a society, and with everything that's like going on, in terms of criminal justice reform and prison abolition, and and all of those pieces, you know, we know that oftentimes people enter law enforcement, because of the power. They're looking for that power. That's what they thrive on, and they're going to prey upon vulnerable people. And I think it's like we really need to do a better job like screening who is caring for our most vulnerable people, because the reality is the prison system, for women, and I'm going to say for men that are incarcerated, there's underlying social and race and all of these factors that are leading people to incarceration, right? I was talking about it earlier this morning. It's not, the prisons are filled with, black and brown people. It's not because black and brown people are more likely to commit crime. It's because we police their neighborhoods more heavily, so they're watched, right? So
Right.
it's like thinking about, the impacts of race on the system, longer sentences, right? All of those, like, greater pieces. And it's often like privileged white men making those decisions for our most vulnerable communities, right? They're the ones sitting on the bench. They're the ones prosecuting these crimes. They're the ones, right? And so looking at like how race and misogyny intersect, and starting to figure out there's got to be some better alternatives than building more prisons. How about instead of building more prisons, we build more programs to help people exit? How about we fund job training and educational programs? How about we take those steps rather than, you know, incarcerating people so we can make money off the backs of, exploited and incarcerated people, because that's really what this is about,
It's
right?
another
It's like,
form of prostitution. They're
mhm,
the pimps, we're the
mhm,
hoes. Let's be honest about this. They're
mhm.
still making money off of us, and that's why they don't want to relinquish their rights to have us in their custody
Yep.
for the amount of time that we're supposed to be there. That's the reality of it.
Yeah.
I think sometimes a lot of people don't want to say it, or if they
Mhm.
see it, they want to ignore it, or we believe in getting justice by punitive damages, by locking somebody up, and because either it's affecting the street you live on because someone is prostituting on that street, instead of us standing in the gaps and saying, okay, I see that this is happening, and this is somebody's mother, somebody's daughter, somebody's sister, and maybe they really don't want to be out there, but it's a cycle that they don't break. So how do I stand in the gaps of the people who are already standing there trying to change the laws, trying to make a better way for these women? And you're right, we do have a choice. I've been to prison and jail 7 times. It took all of those times for me to recognize something in me, but I didn't have a chemical imbalance. I wasn't on drugs or alcohol or any of those things. I made bad choices because of trauma in my past, and I really didn't know how to deal with it. So I continued to keep moving forward. And fortunately for me, and unfortunately, there were judges who recognized that. There was some issues with me growing up, and I had been in the system since I was 5. But that, after like the 5th incarceration, they were like, okay, now if she's going to continue to come back here, what else can I do to help her but just stop her from doing this for the time being? But see, did you notice I said the time being? So what happens after that? Like,
Mhm.
what's your this is the first time I've been out of I was just saying this to somebody the other night. I've been out of prison, and I've actually had a judge say, if you do not go to mental health treatment, I promise you I'm going to lock you up, because you need help and you need to find a better way of living. And I know that you can do this, but it doesn't happen that often.
Mhm. No.
They throw people in jail with nothing else, unless you get
Mhm.
into drug court and you find somebody like Judge Coven out of Quincy Court, who's about to retire soon.
Mhm.
The Judge
Mhm.
Balls, who was in Superior Court, she's retired. um,
Mhm.
Judge Bowden in South Boston, he's in the process of retiring. There's not enough of those judges who would put their hand up and say, wait a minute, I see something else here besides just a person who's misbehaving, and I see their prior bad acts, but how do I help them?
Yeah.
So you have this organization and you're in Worcester, but what about all the other counties and all the other women that need somebody like you to stand in the gap and to like build a bridge for them to get over? Like,
Mhm.
how do we as a community help this process? How do we get this started here in Boston? How do we get this started in other counties that don't have a Nicole Bell, who actually went through something and now she's decided to help other people to stop them from going through what she went through?
Yeah. So, there is a survivor-led organization working with young people in Boston, My Life, My Choice. And then there's also Sherry Jimenez, who's at the APA Center in Boston, who is also a survivor leading an organization. But I will tell you, like, across the state, there's like, 20 something beds for prostituted people, right? So it's like, when we're looking at uh, I mean, we've worked with over 400 unique individuals. So when we're talking about programming specific to prostitution, there's literally 20 something beds like in the entire state, which is like a problem, right? Um, and so I think the first thing that we do, you know, I talked about like coming into programs and having people look at me like, oh, you again, what the fuck? Sorry, I
Right,
shouldn't
right. No, no
watch
worries. No
my
worries.
language, but
Right.
here we are, you again, right? And like, when is she going to fix herself? When is she going to get better? How about just acknowledging that I am a human being as is, right in front of somebody, right? And I think, as somebody that was like prostituted and exploited, I can tell you just how disconnected from the community I felt. I mean, people like would walk, I'd be on the street and I'd be a mess, weighing, 87 pounds, soaking wet, and, crying and sobbing. And people would literally just like walk by me and turn their head the other way so they didn't have to make eye contact with me because it made them uncomfortable, right?
Right.
Instead of actually acknowledging that I'm a human being, and uh, you know perhaps saying hello, perhaps saying hi. Like, so I think first, just acknowledging people as human beings as they are without trying to force anybody to exit. Because oftentimes that's like the requirement of programs is like, oh, you need to do X, Y, or Z in order for me to help you. Okay, well, why can't we just help them? Right? Like, instead of setting all of these like bars for them to jump over or hoops for them to get through in order to access support. How about we just support people as they are? Because I will tell you, once you start to believe that you have people around you that believe in you,
Right.
whether you are attempting to make changes or not, you start to think, hey, maybe I have the capacity to do this and
Right.
I have people to support me in doing it, right? So I think that's the first thing. We need to like get rid of these like structures of worthiness and this idea that, in order for me to support you, you've got to do something to earn that. No, they don't. No, you don't. We're just going to be here because we're here and
Right.
you deserve that.
Right.
Right?
Right.
So I think there's that, right? I think there's so much, I think it's just like seeing the humanity in each other, right? And acknowledging that like we both are sharing this planet, and if there's something I can do to help you, I'm going to. And
Absolutely.
I think also having more survivor led programs and bringing more survivors into this work, because a colleague of mine that works with us, Karen, she always says survivors show up at our doors with dreams, and it's our job to provide hope, right? And
Right.
I think we are able to provide hope just by being, because people are like, hey, Nick, I mean, I have my mugshots hanging on my wall in my office, so that when girls come in, like they're like, oh my God, that was you. And
Right.
it's like, yep, that was right. And it's still me. And like, you don't have to go back to that, right? Like, so I think just having more like survivor led or peer led, whatever, whether it's for formerly incarcerated people, for formerly prostituted people, having people that have lived experience leading change, right?
Right.
I think, more often than not, these programs are designed by people that have never even had these experiences.
Right.
Um, and make up really stupid fucking rules because they don't even know,
Right.
right?
Right.
And so I think those are like two like steps that we can take to start like working to shift, and they're not difficult ones, right? But it's about also like sharing power, and like people in power with privilege don't like to do that. you know um
I have to say something to you because you touched on two things. You touched on the fact that there's certain things that have to happen in order for people to get in programs. And so, you know, that I was at the Rhodes House for a different reason, but nonetheless, I share in everyone's pain because I'm no different from anybody else. It's just a yet for me. I just haven't gotten there yet. You never know where trauma can take you. And I have kept in touch with a lot of women inside of there, as you probably know. I love them. And so I've been in contact with a couple of women who have been kicked out of the Rhodes House for whatever reason and are asking me to help them get into other programs. The requirement to get into a TSS or another facility is you have to have drugs in your system. So if this person is trying to stay clean, you're telling them that they have to go out and use in order for you to help them. And I had a young woman who I had spoke to the night before, and I asked her to hold on. And the next day, her parents reached out to me and her sister and told me that she overdosed in the Wendy's bathroom. And so the reason why I could not get a hold of her anymore is because she was gone, because she kept telling me, and I still have the text, that she could no longer hold on. And that is the worst thing in the world, to know that you have to do something that you're trying not to do in order to get help. That's the one thing that you touched upon. The other thing is that you said there's maybe about 20 something beds for people to get into these programs. And so there if you know, there's a lot of overcrowding in the jails, but they make room for people to come in, whether they open up areas that they shouldn't open up and that are toxic to the women, like Framingham, where there was asbestos, but they didn't care. They were putting people on bunks where the heat's coming from the ceiling and so isn't the asbestos. And they had a lot of lawsuits that they really didn't care about, because who would believe us? We're formerly incarcerated and convicted felons. So you have two big issues, right? Just right there. The fact that I have been friends with some of the best people in these programs and have had them reach out to me for help. And two people passed away, and I felt like it was on my watch, because I kept calling these programs for them, and they kept saying unless they have drugs in their system, they cannot get in. What can we do to stop this from happening? Because there's a lot of people dying because they use one more time so they can get help. How do we combat this? How do we help?
So, it's so frustrating to me to hear that, and I believe I know both of the women that you were talking about. They were both, it's really infuriating. But I will say, there is supposed to be in Massachusetts this no wrong door policy. So you shouldn't need to have to use again to access treatment. And part of it is, us doing the advocacy work to hold people to those standards. Right. If you walk into, a detox and you don't have substances in your system, they are supposed to refer you to the appropriate level of care, which would be a CSS or a TSS. But oftentimes they're like, well, we don't have any beds and you don't meet the criteria. Right. And we don't push back, because oftentimes they'll literally call the police on us. They'll do whatever. Right. Because again, our system is so broken. So I think, reporting those programs that are doing that, I think is a really important step forward, because oftentimes, like BSAS or DPH don't know that programs are doing that, and we're not going to get them to change unless we take those steps. And it's a long, arduous, like frustrating process, but we have to do it. And I think also, like, I think it's, and I think this conversation is starting to happen, and it's not happening soon enough for our sisters that aren't going to live through the conversation, because that's the reality, right? Is changing this, like you said, like, we'll open up more beds in prisons, right? Instead of opening up more programs. Like, and it just shows where, like, our value system is, and like the value that we have on
people
for the lives of people, right? It's like, we don't, right? And then you have, like, the sheriffs that are going around, like, touting what, great jobs they're doing and how they're helping people. I'm going to tell you, keep your help, because, being pulled away from any support you have, being isolated, being put in a cell, all of those things are additional traumas that now I need to recover from.
Right. It's very
Send me to a program.
Yes.
Send me to a program. Or, if I'm not ready, if I am not wanting to go to a program or whatever, okay, then that is my choice and my right. Like, we can't force treatment on people, and that's what we try to do. It's like, oh, I'm saving their life, and it's like, no, you're not, because bad shit is going to happen to me in there. Just like bad shit is going to happen to me out here.
Right.
And at least the bad shit that's happening out there is not at the hands of systems that are supposed to be protecting me.
Absolutely. Nikki, how can we get a hold of you? I know that now that I'm going to reach out to you again off of this show, because I would like to know how I can become more involved in helping you with the system that's basically designed for us to fail. I don't believe in getting in where I can fit in. I believe in bridging the gap. So there's spaces for me to stand in and stand in unison with you and many others like you who are trying to make a difference in the community, and especially in the Black and Brown community where this is happening all the time. Worcester is definitely a melting pot. Every time I go out there, I see women that I have been incarcerated with or see women that I was in a program with. And I ask myself, and a lot of times I won't lie, I get out of the car. I'm not afraid of anybody. I feel like God will protect me from anything, any COVID, anything. I usually have a mask on. I never put gloves on I feel like it is an insult to these people because I understand we're in the middle of a pandemic. But more importantly, I've seen people when we're not in the middle of a pandemic put gloves on and they want to touch them or handle them in a certain way. And I realize that God loves them too. So I need to show some love. And I have hugged a lot of people over the last years of this pandemic and now this epidemic with the pandemic. And I need people to really understand that how you look at a homeless person, no matter what you think their need or not, what they don't need, you don't really know someone's true story and why they're out there to begin with. So I think that it's safe to say, if you're not going to help someone, don't harm them. Your looks can harm somebody if they know that you're looking at them in a way that says that you're disgusted by their appearance and why they're there. So I just want to know if you could share with the people who are listening or who will watch later on, how they can get a hold of you and how they can become involved in LIFT, whether it's to donate or to volunteer. Just let us know.
Yeah. So, you can reach out to us via our website. There's a contact page there, and whether that is to connect survivors to one of our programs or support systems, you can do that via our website. And you can also, for information on internships and how to donate, and that website is liftworcester.org. So that's LIFTWORCESTER.org. And we actually just redid our website, and it's really easy to navigate and has lots of information on what we're doing, and also links to the Emma Coalition, which is the Equality Model Masks page for our legislative action and how we're working to change systems.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I know that I'll be in touch, and I hope everyone who's listening, who believes that everybody is worth fighting for, will join Nicole Bell and LIFT and other programs like hers. We see a lot of young women missing. We don't know where they're at. 9 times out of 10, they met someone online. That person's much older than them, and now they're in the possession of a predator. And more importantly, there's plenty of predators in jail when women and men are sent to jail to do time, and then other things happen behind the wall to further traumatize a lot of us. So, Nikki, I thank you for joining me this evening. I thank you for your transparency. I thank you for wanting to help. Usually people who have been traumatized and they come through on the other side and they're still healing, they sometimes find it hard to help other people because it brings up issues for them, whereas they're taken back to things that have been hurtful to them. So I applaud you for being able to stand in that and sometimes maybe meet somebody that was once like you and not give up on them. I think that's very important, and I thank you and I love you for that always. If you ever need me, I'm around. You know, I'm a stalker, as you can see. If I'm looking for you and I want you to be on my show, I don't stop. And if you post a picture like I did you, I comment under, I've been looking for you. So I think that this is important. And I think that I needed you to come here to share this so that people can understand how important it is to treat people kindly, and just know that even a look, even if you're surprised at the way someone looks, it could turn them off and they just spiral out of control. So be very aware of how you treat people. Thank you for joining Not Your Normal Conversation with Tawana B and Nicole Bell. Nikki, thank you again. You guys have a blessed evening, and I'll see you next week.
Thank you, Tawana.
You are so welcome. It was a pleasure to have you on this platform.